Hi, Susie. Nice to
Hi,
see you.
everybody. I don't know about all of you, but I have started October working on fumes. I think I overdid it in August and September, and I am really paying the price now. So today's guest is the perfect guest to talk me out of this funk and teach me and teach all of us how we can do this better, how we can be more creative, and how we can actually have just a little bit of a reprieve for ourselves so that we have time to reflect and be creative and not start a new month just working off of the fumes. So there has to be a better way. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I am Dr. Ruth Gotian, and welcome to the Optimizing Your Success show hosted by the Mentor Project. And we have our all-star panel today, starting with Tina Parker, who is the Chief Marketing Officer for the Mentor Project, three-time Olympian and original Jamaican bobsledder, Devin Pele Harris. The most amazing photographer I have ever seen with her own TED Talk, Susie Katz, and the #1 hearing advocate who got hearing access in every museum, theater, New York City taxi, and probably 1,000 other places I don't even know about, Janice Lintz, physician scientist and computer modeler and all things COVID expert and of the day expert, and Forbes contributor, Dr. Bruce Wiley, and of course, our guest, who is, as of the other day, a Wall Street Journal best-selling author of The Long Game, Dory Clark. Hey,
Thank you,
Dory.
Ruth.
Hey, Dory, so good to see you here. And, I read the first few pages of your book, and I was like, oh my God, that's me. Oh my God, I totally get that, where you're running from one activity to the other. Dory, tell us your story and tell us just what led you to this book, The Long Game. So brilliantly done.
Thank you, Ruth. I appreciate it. Well, what Ruth is alluding to, the book starts with me describing an early morning wake up where I had a 5:30 flight out of JFK to fly to California and work all day, and then fly to another gathering in Atlanta and have dinner with a client, and then fly back to New York and go from the airport to a reception. And I think so many of us have had days and weeks and, years like that, where we just find ourselves running on fumes and going from one thing to another. And after a while, it just becomes unsustainable. And I think certainly COVID has shown a lot of people, particularly with regard to travel, but with just about everything, you see statistics now that anywhere from a quarter to half of employees are thinking of quitting their jobs. This is a time where many people have been reevaluating their priorities and really thinking through, okay, what do I want my life to look like? What am I actually optimizing for? And those are some of the topics that I address in The Long Game.
So, Dory, what are the tips? What should we be doing? What could we be doing?
Yes. How do we do it?
How do we do it? What's a quick fix?
Yeah, exactly. What's a quick fix to play the long game? That's a right question, Ruth. Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
So, broadly speaking, I divide the book into 3 sections, and I think that this reflects in many ways the way that I think about the arc toward long-term thinking. The first is claiming white space, because part of the big problem for a lot of us, for busy professionals, is that we just don't have any room to breathe. I mean, we all know, right? You cannot add more water to a glass that's already full. And it's not that it takes inordinate amounts of time to do strategic thinking, but it does take some time. And so finding some ways, even just around the edges, to be a little bit smarter about our use of time, so we're not just trying again and again to slam 120% of activities into 100% of our time. That's just unsustainable. The second part is actually understanding and deciding what we want to focus on. Because for a lot of us, if we are caught in this kind of heads down autopilot mode for too long, we often can begin to lose touch with our own priorities. We begin to take on other people's priorities or society's priorities, which often doesn't necessarily match with what we are called to do. So we have to separate out those voices. And then finally, the last section of the book is what I call keeping the faith, because inevitably, if we are marching toward a long-term enough goal, it is almost a certainty that we are going to get blocked in some way. I wish we weren't. I wish that wasn't the case, but it is more likely than not that there will be some detours, that there will be some changes or frustrations. And we have to learn how to surmount them and get through that. It's very easy to get discouraged, but I want to live in a world where more good people are able to actually get their ideas heard and accomplished. And so we need to be able to keep the faith and be resilient, even when we do get turned down or waylaid in some way.
So you talk about the idea of strategic patience. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So in the long game, prop, I do talk about strategic patience, and this is a concept that I've thought about a lot because I have never been a fan of garden variety patience. That is not my favorite thing in the world. Ever since I was a little kid, my mom would always, sort of the mantra, oh, just be patient, just be patient. And as an adult, we hear it too. So often you want to do something at work, you want to make a change, you want to accomplish something. Just wait a little bit. Just be patient. And you keep hearing that. And what you actually realize is just be patient is essentially like, shut the F up. That's actually what they're telling you.
Yeah.
And I think, that's not how I want to live my life. I want to make things happen. Now, it is equally true that we can't force everything, right? There's some things that just do take time. If you're trying to, age wine, it doesn't usually go well if you try to somehow magically rush that process. Things do take time, but it doesn't mean that you just sit back wishing and hoping on your Barca lounger. Strategic patience is formulating a hypothesis, doing things to test it all the while, and realizing it might take a long time, it might take longer than you want, but you are moving toward it. You're being directionally correct every step along the way.
And are there milestones that you should be hitting along the way?
Well, I think one of the most important things we can do, oftentimes a question that I get asked, which is a good one, is okay, yes, Dory, we need to be patient, we need to be resilient, but how do we make sure that we are not being patient and resilient for the wrong thing, for something that's a bad idea or for something that's never going to work? And of course, this is something you want to be concerned about. Quite honestly, I think that the human tendency is much more in the opposite direction, that we're too quick to quit rather than pursuing something for too long that doesn't work. It does happen, but I think it happens less frequently. But ultimately, where I think a lot of people falter, and we could actually be making smarter moves. So I advise this for anybody, is taking the time to scope out a problem effectively before you do it. It is hard, but not impossible to run a marathon. People do it all the time. But the problem comes if you thought you were signing up for a 5K and you finish your 5K and you're proud and you look around and you're like, oh my God, I'm not done. And you realize you actually have somehow gotten on a marathon course. That's where you get discouraged. That's where people quit. If we know in advance it's a marathon, you are able to marshal the resources to get it done.
And plan accordingly. Devin, you've got experience in this.
Yep. Well, I have run a half marathon, not a marathon. But Dora, congratulations on the success of the book. Awesome. I love the term strategic patience. The one that I have coined myself and lived by is being patiently impatient. Because I agree with you that it does take time, but you have to have a sense of urgency as well, right? You can't just sit back and expect it to happen. But, as you talk about prioritizing, the things that we want, how do you balance the need and the importance of prioritize your personal priority, even as you were living in this sea of uncertainty and chaos with all the other things that are happening around us that really, some of them are important, and I don't believe we should live a life that is just about ourselves. How do you give oxygen to some of those things that may not personally impact you, but if you're a decent human being, at least should be important to you?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, Devin. I would love to hear your answer to that as well. I will just kick the conversation off by saying that one of the themes that I talk about a lot in the long game is that we really only learn by taking action. And so often one of the dangers is that people become paralyzed by just, I want to write a book, but my God, where do I start? How do I do it? And then, they don't do anything. When if you're just, commit to writing 200 words a day, eventually it will get done. And similarly, when it comes to societal concerns, for a lot of people, it's very easy to get pretty quickly overwhelmed by the idea of, oh, there's so many things. I mean, there's there's climate change, and there's homelessness, and there's immigration, and there's mental health, and all the things. Where do you start? And so this is the place where I'm going to go back to Rabbi Tarfon, right? So Jews in the house, you are not required to complete the work of perfecting the world, but neither are you permitted to desist from trying. And so,
Dory, the fact that you know that is blowing my mind.
I try to keep up.
You definitely do. And every so often, Dory throws in these Yiddish words. I'm like, where did this come from?
So, I think we have to have a hypothesis about how we can help. And so, for me, there's a million social issues where I'm just like, okay, man, I don't have the bandwidth, but we all have to have a piece. And I think as long as we have our hypothesis that we are moving forward, I mean, Janice is a great example. She is leading the way on hearing and, disability rights and access, and, just making a more equal society that way. I am not going to get mad at Janice if she's not all, at a climate march, because she's doing her thing. Right. And, so similarly, I mean, there's also large and small ways, which I think is important. And one of the concepts that I talk about in the long game is thinking in waves. And so I also really want to be respectful that, there are waves in people's lives. When people are in, for instance, a caregiving situation, they often just have a lot less bandwidth at that moment for things outside of the immediate sphere. And, I cut them slack for that. And also, there are other times in our life where we do have more bandwidth. And I think that's a really good and really appropriate way to begin to say, all right, well, how can I expand the parameters of what I'm thinking about and be able to give back? And, even in sort of day-to-day things, I mean, this is sort of a small example, but for me, this is not something that comes up a lot unless we're having dinner. But, I'm a vegetarian, and I've been a vegetarian for 30 years now. And that's something that's important to me, is, kind of a small way of reducing my environmental footprint and, trying to hopefully have do less bad things to animals. So even in our day-to-day gestures, I think there's small ways that we can be helpful in a broader sense. But talk to me about how you think about that, Devin.
No, I actually agree with you. I think we're on the same wavelength here, that obviously you take care of the things that are important to you in terms of your personal goals. But you don't have to save the world all at once. I think all of us can find out one thing that we care about and pursue a path that's going to help us to make a little difference. My view is that if all of us do a little bit in our little corner, eventually it connects kind of like a Venn diagram, and the whole world becomes better. I think too many people sometimes think that for them to make a difference, they have to do something huge. They have to have millions of dollars to give away, or create this huge worldwide movement whereby that's not the case. It's really just about finding a cause that's important to you and doing your little thing. I mean, I have a charity as well that does work back in my old neighborhood in Jamaica, trying to raise young people who started out behind the 8 ball like myself to hopefully end up on a show like this, hanging out with you. See how that works?
I love it. Bringing it all back home, Devin. I love it.
Now, Dory, I've always thought that a lot of our work really overlaps at some point. I study extreme high achievers. And the one thing that I've noticed is that while regular people are talking about one day I'm going to do this, one day I'm going to do that, one day I'm going to do the next thing, where high achievers make today day one. They actually start and they do something incremental toward their goal.
And really high achievers name their buildings day one. It's a Jeff Bezos joke, but please
True.
proceed.
So I'm wondering, what are some of the things, some of the ideas, some of the steps that you think that people can really do, thinking strategically with that strategic patience and the long game? What can they do to actually start today toward meeting their long-term goal?
Well, I think, Ruth, you raised a really important point, because, yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, we all know plenty of people that are sort of in the wishing and hoping and someday category. I think about my dad, for instance. My dad always was going to write a book. He was like, I remember one Christmas we bought him, all the notebooks and the pencils and and he's like dictating into his little, micro recorder and whatever. Did he ever write a book? The answer is no, he did not. And that was actually part of what animated me in wanting to actually write a book and not just be a person that talked about wanting to write a book. And so
you've written 4.
Yes, I've written 4. Exactly. Or over deliver. But I think that for me, one of the most powerful realizations when it comes to long-term thinking, sometimes people say, okay, well, great. That it would be nice to have a 20-year plan or a 10-year plan or something like that. But, I don't know how I'm going to get there. And what I realized is actually something that's so incredibly powerful. If you have a long-term enough plan, you don't have to have any idea how you're going to get there. It actually, there's sort of this inverse correlation, because the bigger the goal, the longer term the goal, the less likely you are to have to know anything about it. I mean, if I say, oh, next week I'm going to go to California, well, if it's actually a goal for next week, I really ought to be buying the plane ticket. I really ought to be booking my rental car. You really ought to be doing stuff. If I'm saying, in 20 years, this is actually literally true. In 20 years, my goal is to be a United States ambassador. I don't have to know how to do that. All I need to know is, number one, is it theoretically plausible? Like, I don't want to be, coming up with some goal that doesn't make any sense in the world, but is it theoretically plausible that I could be a United States ambassador? Yes, I think it is. And I also don't necessarily know what that path would look like. It would be foolish for me to try to map out an exact path, because probably what is involved is raising money on a political campaign that somebody's running for president and they win. Who is going to be running for president 16 years from now? I have no idea. We've got to see how all that plays out. But you want to be directionally correct and just taking the smallest steps you can. So by identifying that, it's really just, sort of being on the lookout for opportunities. Like, oh, who do I know that, like, okay, their relative was an ambassador? Or how can I start to, get involved in politics in such a way that maybe I'd be in a position where candidates would be coming to me looking for me to be part of their finance team or their strategy team in 20 years' time. If I can lay those pieces now, then it actually becomes statistically quite possible that I could be in the running for an ambassadorship.
Well, I think you need to talk to Janice. She could probably set you up. Tina, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, in fact, Dory, that is exactly the question I was going to ask you, and you touched on it before I even had a chance. Is people, so much of the time, people don't even get started because they don't know the how, right? And so when you talk about claiming that white space to try to just be open to those possibilities and the opportunities and focusing on what it is you really want, how do you guide people that you're coaching on figuring out what is that they want to focus on and create in their life?
Yeah, you raise a great point. So if you have a little bit of white space, let's assume that's the case, how do you even kind of know what to do with it? One of the concepts that I actually devote some airtime to in the long game is actually, it's inspired by Google, and many of you may be familiar with this, their Google 20% time policy, where they encourage people to spend up to their employees to spend up to 20% of their time on these more speculative activities. Now, the interesting thing, of course, if you know Google employees, the majority, in fact, of Google employees do not take advantage of 20% time. It is hard, even if you work at a company that purportedly is like, the king of 20% time. it is hard to break away from the pressures of, oh my God, I have this meeting. Oh my God, I have to answer these emails. It's really challenging for any of us. But I think that, we need to be the captains of this. You have to forcibly defend it. But spending 20% time is one of the best things that we can do in terms of just having playful, speculative work that we are doing. And it could be almost anything. It could be professional development, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. For the past 5 years, I have been allocating the vast majority of my 20% time to learning to write musical theater, which theoretically sounds like, like, why is that relevant? Like, maybe you should be learning coding, Dory, or something. Maybe I should. I don't know. But I just really freaking don't want to. But musical theater is something, I don't know. I don't know if it's, how or when it's going to pay off, quote unquote.
Well, you got a Grammy, you're good.
Work at the angles. That's right. My goal is to have a show on Broadway for the 2026 season. Again, I don't know if I will actually get there, but that is the goal that I am working toward. And I would say at this point, 5 years out, it is not impossible that I would do it. I have now, in the past 5 years, I've learned to write musical theater. I have completed a fairly prestigious training program. I have written a complete musical. I've just been accepted to a new fellowship program. So I think that, the goal is just to keep your options open and keep working towards something. And as long as it continues to be a plausible option and you're moving in the right direction, you're getting where you need to go.
That's exactly right. That's actually the way to do it. Susie, talking about patience, boy, as a photographer and taking the steps to get to where you need to go.
Well, I spend most of my time these days with my nonprofit Photo Wings, where I'm interviewing hundreds of hours of photographers that are on the ground working. And sometimes they have a 24-hour turnaround or a very fast deadline. But if they have a little bit of a longer time, they go in with something in mind, and then they take some regeneration time and they talk to people and they relax and they think. And sometimes they realize that the story is really something different than what they thought. And I'm thinking about a story of an advertising photographer who was photographing something in New Jersey, and then his girlfriend tapped him on the shoulder and says, "Turn around, dummy." And he turned around and there was the most gorgeous reflection on the Manhattan. So sometimes you just need to kind of pivot a little bit and be nimble. And, that regeneration time will really help you with that. And the other thought that I had when you were speaking earlier was the saying, if you're careful enough, nothing good or bad will ever happen to you. So if you stay so laser focused, you may be missing other opportunities.
Brilliantly said. Now, what you were saying, Dory, about taking that 20% time, there's actually been research out of Mayo that said, not about taking 20% time off, but if you spend 20% of your time doing what you love, then you are happier at work. Mm-hmm. So it's the same concept. And, what you were saying is that people don't take that time. It's the same thing in academia. Bruce, I'd love to hear your thoughts. We get, as faculty member, time to take sabbatical. How many people actually take it? Bruce, have you ever taken yours? Bruce,
I'm muted. So I did want to add that if Janice ever runs for president, I'm voting for her.
Yeah, I think we all are.
Yes, because then things would get done. So yeah, good question, Ruth. I also wanted to add, for instance, Dory, you talk about setting long-term goals and things like that. So my long-term goal was to have the right cinnamon bun background.
Crushed it, man.
But I realized that perfect was the enemy of good, and that I could sit there and look at, there are all these photos out there. So I knew I had to choose one. Otherwise, I'd be spending the next 5 hours looking for that perfect one. So I just threw up something up there and got it done. Just a word. When you're searching for cinnamon bun, don't leave out the term cinnamon, because you'll get a whole bunch of other stuff.
I swear to everyone, he is brilliant. He gave a closing keynote at the NIH last week. But yeah, now we're talking about cinnamon.
So that's my long-term goal. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think you really need to just get started doing things and not be perfect. You should just get the ball in motion. And I think one of the problems is as Ruth, you were alluding to, there's a friend of mine likes to use the term tyranny of the urgent, where you're so caught up in all the urgent things, and this is true with in academia, where you've got 50 million things. You can always do something else, right? You can always fill your time, another committee, another thing, et cetera. So unless you actually carve out that time to say, hey, let me just kind of explore, and what do I really want to do in the long term, then you'll never get a chance to do that. I have bigger plans than just cinnamon buns. There are other baked goods which I would like to explore. And so I need that time to search for other pictures.
Dory, you are the queen of developing professional relationships, what other people call networking. And how does that work, that special skill which you have really mastered and teach to so many? How does that work with, tell me if I did this right with the prop, the long game?
So good. So good. Thank you, Ruth.
I have to practice for when my book comes out.
I know. That's going to be pretty soon. When is that happening?
January.
Oh, nice. I'm very excited for you. That'll be great.
Thank you. Devin, Janice, and Debbie are all in it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't miss with that.
We will all be holding up the book.
But for now, networking in the long game.
Yes. So yes, well, I will start by talking about one piece of advice that I share in the long game, and we can sort of branch out from there. But one of the sort of formulations that I've developed over the years that I think can be a useful framework for people is what I call no asks for a year. And part of the reason that I have this mantra when it comes to networking is that so often where I think people go wrong in networking is that, and this goes both ways, right? We've all been assaulted by people asking for favors too fast. And sometimes we have, perhaps made mistakes where we have asked for favors too fast, and it's kind of burned the relationship. And of course, it's because the danger in relationship building is that you don't want to be or to come across as a user. That is not what anybody wants in their life. And so with a no asks for a rule year, what I'm really trying to provide is some kind of a framework so that just never happens. Now, I don't mean obviously like you can't invite them to hang out, because that is sort of the point of getting to know them. But I mean an ask that involves political capital. That is the thing that, especially for people with relatively high status, they're barraged all the time. And so when they receive an ask from you and you haven't really sufficiently built the relationship, it kind of blows it up. But later, if you just literally take it off the table, later on, once you're friends, odds are, number one, they will freely offer things to you because they want to help you because they are your friend. And also, you're not even keeping track at that point, because you have built a relationship where there is so much shared history and shared giving in both directions that it doesn't even compute on the same tabulation anymore.
That's right. Now, Dory, I 100% agree with that. I once had, after a talk that I gave, someone said, "Oh, that was a great talk. I'm, a graduate student, whatever. Would you look over my dissertation?" And they sent me their 100-page dissertation. Honey, I don't even know you. I am not reading your 100-page dissertation. So I 100% agree with you that it cannot be transactional. That just will not work. You really need to develop that relationship. Now, you talk about 3 different types of networking in the long game. Can you just teach us a little bit about that?
Well, I can certainly tell you about the 3 types of networking in the long game. You're getting so good. It's like,
am I getting good?
Smooth.
Does it look more natural now?
Just we're like the flag semaphore girls.
That's it. Devin's getting embarrassed.
No, I'm fine. Just listening.
Love it. Well, so yes, I try to codify a little bit about types of networking. Again, because I feel like there are plenty of people that do not like networking, that, say, oh, I hate that. That's not my thing. Really what they are responding to, I think it's really important to be clear about terms. What they are responding to is one type of networking, and that is short-term transactional networking. Like, I don't think there's anybody out there that's like, you're like, hey, would you like to make a new friend? And they're like, oh, I hate friends. Who wants friends? Like, I mean, maybe Oscar the Grouch. But aside from that, if the question is, do you want to make friends? Then I think the answer is yes. But that's not what people are envisioning when they're thinking about networking. Short-term transactional networking, let's just take that off the table. The other two types.
But we don't like that. We don't like that.
No,
Okay.
definitely not. So the other two types are long-term networking and what I call infinite horizon networking. Now, long-term networking is what I would say most good networkers do, right? You find an interesting person, you respect them, you think they're cool. You don't necessarily know, quote unquote, what you want from them or what they can do for you. You don't necessarily know what you can do for them, but you just think, okay, this is cool. Like, they're sort of in my world. I want to get to know them. Let's be friends. That's a perfectly great way to network. I totally endorse that. The part that I wanted to highlight in the long game, because I think it gets underutilized, and conferences like Renaissance Weekend, where I know many of you from, are actually great for this, is infinite horizon networking. And that, to me, is a kind that even great networkers often overlook. And that is networking and building relationships with people who on the surface seem completely irrelevant to you. They're not in your field. They're not in your region. They're totally different from you demographically. You're like, what would I ever do with this person?
With an astronaut, right?
Or
astrophysicist.
Exactly. Yeah. But actually, those can be some of the most transformative relationships, because those are the ones that can genuinely change your perspective on things, because they're telling you things, they're exposing you to things that you would not get otherwise. And also, over time, in weird ways, your path might get closer to them than you imagine, or vice versa. And they might become actually surprisingly relevant. So that's the wild card that can actually pay off in really tremendous ways.
So how do you meet people in this infinite horizon type of networking?
So there's a couple of, I would say 3 good strategies to be able to do that. The first is sort of the ideas conference circuit. So like a Renaissance Weekend or a TED or something like that. Obviously, that's not necessarily accessible to everybody, but TEDx, for instance, is typically either free or very low cost for people all around the world. And there are a lot of really cool people in local communities that participate in that. So I think that's a great way to do it. A second strategy is actually alumni associations, because you have something in common. You all went to Cornell or, whatever your school is, but you have, the nature of a college is that it graduates people who go off in a million different directions. And so getting involved actively in an alumni club or association is a great way to connect with people who have just landed all over. And then the last piece is connecting with friends and sort of jointly hosting things. So just as one example, back pre-COVID, when I was having more dinner gatherings in the city, I would often co-host with a friend and basically say, like, okay,
that friend is going to be on the show in a few weeks, so you can say her name.
Oh, amazing. Yes. My pal, Alyssa Cohn, who will be a guest star. And actually there's a few different friends that I've done this with, because I do try to cross-pollinate networks. But I'd say, like, okay, I'll invite 4 people, you invite 4 people, and you deliberately try to invite friends that your friends don't know. And, it's actually like you almost get extra points if the person is like really like weird. Like, not weird in terms of their table manners, but weird in terms of like, whoa, where'd you get the profestional fisherman? Like, oh, that's exciting.
Or the Jamaican bobsledder. Well, if there's a queen of networking and getting to the people in terms of both long-term and infinite horizon, I think that's the one who's in the center of my screen now, which is Janice Lentz. I mean, talk about an expert at this. Janice, how do you do it? And what do you think of the long-term and infinite horizon type of networking?
It's exactly what I do. I mean, I have to say, Dory coached me about that right from the beginning of meeting her Renaissance weekend. I mean, she's spoken about this, and I agree with it, because there is nothing worse than when someone is super transactional. It's just an incredible, it's a turnoff. But you and I are a perfect example. So we met through this Saturday night group. We got to know each other. You actually never asked me for help. You just asked a general if anybody knew anyone. And we became good friends. And I was really thrilled to help you, because that's, to me, what friends do. And I introduced you to Maxine Clark, who was on the show and is in your book, who was the former CEO of Build-A-Bear Workshop. And then John Jarvis, who was the former director of the National Park Service. But it was a wonderful way to do and help you, because not only was I helping you, I was helping them, because who wouldn't want to be in a book about success, right? So that was a win. And it gave me an opportunity to say thank you to people that I had no idea how to say thank you to. Like, I mean, what do you do for such incredible people that had helped me with access? And it was a lovely
and have
way.
everything.
Right. And have, but they had just, I mean, Maxine added hearing aids to Build-A-Bear's Workshop's product line, which was the first toy company to ever have hearing aids. And John had me help write the National Park Service guidelines, and then acknowledged me by name in the guidelines. So, like, how do you ever say thank you to someone? And then being able to leverage those guidelines, which he knew, because we discussed how I was going to leverage the guidelines to affect further change, which made it easy when your name is in the guidelines. How do you say thank you? So it was a great way to say thank you. So I like to do networking where everybody wins.
That's
like
the best kind.
No, right? Because that's the best type. So that you're, like Dory said, you're not a taker, not a user. I never want to, because that just feels like awful. And we've all been in that situation where you feel like someone is, and we've discussed this, where someone is constantly taking, and you're like, okay, like, is there ever going to be a time when you offer to help me once in a while, right?
Or even ask me what I need.
Or even, like, I'm not even positive, like, you really know anything about me, because it's, and I was on a call recently where someone, and Ruth happened to be texting me at the time, and there was like 7 different asks, one after another, and I offered because it was, and then another one, and then I was like,
Wait, to be clear, it was not me with the 7 apps.
No, it was not. But it was I remember thinking, I wonder how many more there are going to be. And then, like, it just kept going, and there was no end. And I was like, this is just seriously gross. So I think Dory's advice is just 100% fantastic.
And, you know, I think also what Dory said about the alumni groups is also spot on. And it's also a possibility to tap into that. So, Devin, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. When I was writing the book, The Success Factor, I needed to talk to more, I specifically needed Winter Olympians and I needed Paralympians. Now, these are not people who are generally in my contact list, but I knew enough Olympians who knew people who knew people who knew people, and they also have their own listservs and Facebook groups, et cetera. And somebody actually put a post on my behalf, and that's how I got to know a lot of them. And then Devin, right? All you need to know is one, and they can introduce you to others. Right. Devin actually introduced me to Bonnie Blair, the speed skater, and to several Paralympians, several who have been on the show as well. So it's true. It's once you know one, they can also introduce you to others, but you can't ask them, as Dory said, until they know you well enough. And obviously Devin and I know each other well enough. He knows I'm legit. Right, Devin?
Yeah, absolutely. The networking game is something I'm learning, because I tend to be a loner. Like, I have something to do and I go get it done. But I'm learning over the years that you sometimes need other people to their elbow grease as well. And so, when I meet people, my inclination is to offer myself as a resource. Hey, if there's anything you need, I'm only a phone call away, and not necessarily to ask. But then there are times when I'm able to not necessarily ask on my behalf, but for somebody else. And I absolutely love that. And so, like getting a chance to connect Ruth with some of my friends is a treat.
And now Devin is an official mentor with the Mentor Project. So it comes full circle.
You hook up some people, you get the hookup too, man.
There you go. You're at the cool kids table. Now, Dory, I know because I've read every single one of your 4 books. You create an assessment that people can do that's connected with the book. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And are you willing to give away that link?
I can, Ruth. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yes, there is a free self-assessment that goes with the long game. It is the long game strategic thinking self-assessment. And it basically helps people reflect back on their own lives and think about ways that they can apply the principles of strategic thinking to enhance their life and their career. And folks can get it for free at doryclark.com/thelonggame.
Great. And your book, your Wall Street Journal top ranked book, where is that now? Where can people get that?
Thank you. Folks can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of the book places that you might go. You can get it there. Bookshop.org, is it? For the indie bookshops. But also on my website, there's lots of links. Go to doryclark.com/longgame, and you can click for whatever country you're in.
Beautiful. Thank you. And Dory, if people want to hear more about you, where can they find you?
Not to be too repetitive, but they can go to doryclark.com and they can find all the things. You can just Google. I always like seeing the listing on Google because it tells you what the common queries are. And so my favorite is Dory Clark net worth, because there's a website that actually tells you what they think people's net worth is. And I love going to it regularly because it has listed my net worth as being anywhere from $300,000 to $26 million, depending on the day. So it's very exciting. I'm not quite sure where they're getting this information, but I'm like, wow.
I knew you were big. I didn't know it was that big.
Exactly.
Guys, thank you so much. Now, for people who want to find out more about our panelists, tell us where we can find you, starting with Tina.
All right, everyone, I am on LinkedIn at TP Sunshine, and you can also find me at my transformational leadership coaching site, leadoutsidethelines.com. Beautiful,
thank you. Jamaican bobsledder, Devin.
Oh yeah, devonharris.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on YouTube, of course, at Keep On Pushing TV, on Facebook, and I'm not in a leotard. I'm in a speed suit.
That's a dig at me because I keep asking you about that.
Keep On Pushing 88 on Twitter and Instagram.
Speed suit. Okay. Susie Katz.
So you can find how I spend most of my time these days at photowings.org, photowings.org. And there's a ton of content there. And if you want to see a little bit of my personal work, you can find some of it on the Mentor Project, where I'm a part of it, and I gave some presentations, or susankatz.com.
Thank you. Janice.
Thank you. This was so much fun. I can be found my consulting work at hearingaccess.com and my advocacy work at janicelintz.com. And I can thank Dory for helping me figure out the name of that because it was really complicated.
Of Janice Lintz?
Yeah, and not to use my S in the middle. She was right. Excellent advice.
Bruce.
Yeah, thanks, Dory. This is great. I always, my goal is always to get a cinnamon from people. So now I realize I need to wait a little longer before I ask that. So you can reach me, bruceylee.com. If you Google just Bruce Lee, you'll get like Bruce Lee martial arts or something like that. So you want to do Bruce
and net worth.
Yeah, maybe. Or you can Google Bruce Y. Lee Forbes to get my read my stuff. And at Bruce_Y_Lee is my social for Twitter.
Beautiful. Dory, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. My name is Dr. Ruth Gotian. I can be found all the social media, just my name, Ruth Gotian, or ruthgotian.com. And tomorrow, Forbes article, for those who follow my article, this is Nobel Prize week. The Nobel Prizes are being distributed this week. I did not get that early morning phone call. But tomorrow I am writing about specifically a group of people who won the Nobel. There's actually 10 who won it during who worked at the NIH during a specific time period during the Vietnam War. And they're called the Yellow Berets. So I'm going to be, I'm sharing an article a little bit about the Yellow Berets, and it has a quote from Bob Lefkowitz, who will be our guest in 2 weeks, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. So guys, thank you so much for joining. Go pick up Dorie Clark's book, The Long Game. It is exceptional. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.